My name is David Harrison. I turned 80 this past spring. The older I get, the more I understand that life isn't taken from us all at once. It thins out slowly, like the paint on an old porch railing. You don't notice it fading year to year. And then one day you rest your hand there and realize the wood is showing through. I used to believe I had built a solid life. I had a steady job, a house with a maple tree out front, 2 children who grew taller than me before I knew what happened, a marriage that lasted 39 years. From the outside it all looked dependable, respectable, American in the way we were taught to aim for. My wife's name was Elizabeth. If you had asked me at 45 whether I was a good husband, I would have said yes without hesitation. I worked hard. I came home every night. I paid the bills before they were due. I fixed what broke. I kept the car running. I thought love meant staying, and I did stay. But here's something nobody tells you when you're young and building your life. Staying and showing up are not always the same thing. When Elizabeth and I were first married, we talked about everything. We would sit at the kitchen table long after dinner plates were cleared, coffee cooling between us, dreaming about places we might see someday. She wanted to visit Ireland. Her grandfather had come from there. She kept an old black and white photograph of green hills folded into a cookbook. Back then I told her we would go. There is a kind of confidence that comes with youth. You believe time is generous. You believe there will always be another summer. Then life begins. Career, mortgage, school schedules, promotions you chase, because that's what men were expected to do. I told myself I was building security. I wore long hours like a badge of honor. I mistook exhaustion for purpose. Elizabeth would suggest things. Let's take a weekend up in the mountains. Maybe we could try that Italian class. Let's just sit outside tonight. And I always had a reason. Too tired. Too busy. Next year. Next year became a comfortable phrase in our house. It settled into the air like dust. I didn't see what was happening. Not because I was cruel, because I was certain I was right. I believed that providing was the same thing as loving, that stability was intimacy, that if there were no fights, no betrayals, then everything must be fine. We became efficient partners. We ran a household like a well-oiled machine. The children thrived. The bills were paid. The lawn was cut every Saturday morning. But somewhere along the way, we stopped choosing each other. Not dramatically, quietly. You can live beside someone for decades and still not truly know the weather inside their heart. You assume you know because you share an address, but proximity is not closeness. Looking back now, I see that I confused peace with connection. I thought because things were calm, they were healthy. I didn't understand that comfort can sometimes be distance in disguise. We were not unhappy. We were just parallel. 2 straight lines running in the same direction, never touching. And when you live that way long enough, it begins to feel normal. That was the illusion. Elizabeth was diagnosed with lung cancer in February. She was gone by June. 4.5 months from your healthy to hospice equipment in the living room. Time, it turns out, is not as generous as we imagine. In those last weeks, the house felt different. The same walls, the same photographs. But the air had weight. Morning light came through the blinds and landed on her blanket, and I found myself studying small things, the way her hands rested, the quiet rise and fall of her breathing. We began talking in ways we hadn't in years. When you know the clock is ticking, Honesty shows up whether you invite it or not. One evening, she looked at me and said something I still hear when the house is quiet. "David, we spent our whole lives being right, but we never became close. At first I felt defensive. It seemed impossible. We had 39 years behind us, shared history, shared children, shared grief and celebration. How could that not be closeness? But as the days passed, I understood what she meant. Being right is about position, about logic, about winning small arguments no one remembers. Being close is about curiosity, about asking questions you don't already know the answers to, about listening when it would be easier to nod and move on. She told me about dreams she had folded away quietly, about evenings she felt invisible, sitting across from me while the television filled the room with noise, about how she stopped asking for things because she grew tired of hearing "not now." There was no anger in her voice, just sadness, and that was worse. One afternoon, about a month before she passed, she mentioned Ireland again, not with longing, just as a memory. "I always thought we'd make it there," she said. I told her we still could. I said we'd find a way. She smiled gently and said, "I didn't want you to take me because you felt you had to. I wanted you to want to go with me." There are sentences that divide your life into before and after. That was one of them. After she died, I found a box in her closet while sorting through her things. Inside were letters, written to me, never given. She wrote about loneliness, about sitting beside me and feeling miles away, about hoping the man she married would come back, the one who asked questions, who reached across the table just because. She also wrote about love, about how she never stopped loving me, about how she believed I loved her too, even when I didn't know how to show it. That nearly broke me. I was not unfaithful. I was not cruel. I was inattentive. And inattention, over time, has consequences. Relationships do not usually collapse under one terrible mistake. They erode under 1,000 small dismissals, 1,000 postponed conversations, 1,000 quiet choices to look elsewhere. I thought I had time to fix it. We all think that. But life does not send reminders. It simply moves forward. After the funeral, the house felt enormous. The clock in the hallway sounded louder than it ever had. I poured 1 cup of coffee instead of 2. Her side of the bed remained untouched for months, not because I couldn't move her pillow, but because moving it felt final. I began noticing other things too. Friends who had lost their spouses, men sitting alone at diners on weekday mornings, women walking slowly through grocery stores with no one waiting at home. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from realizing you were alone long before you recognized it. That realization is heavy, and it arrives quietly. That was the cost. I am 80 now. The maple tree out front is taller than the house. The porch boards creak under my weight in familiar places. I sit out here most mornings with my coffee and watch the light stretch across the yard. Aging does something unexpected. It narrows your world, but deepens it. I no longer rush anywhere. The hardware store can wait. The mail can sit in the box another hour. What matters now are smaller things. The warmth of the sun on my forearm, the smell of cut grass drifting from a neighbor's lawn, the way memory shows up without knocking. I think about Elizabeth often. Not only the end, the beginning too. The way she laughed with her whole body. The way she folded towels with careful corners. The way she would rest her hand lightly on my back in crowded rooms. What remains, after all the noise settles, are not the promotions, not the square footage of the house, not the arguments I was certain I had won. What remains are moments I overlooked. I cannot go back and take her to Ireland, but I have learned something in the years since she left. Attention is love, not grand gestures, not expensive trips. Attention. When my grandson sits across from me and tells me about his day at school, I put the newspaper down. When my daughter calls, I listen to the pauses in her voice as much as the words. I have learned to ask one more question before changing the subject. It does not undo the past, but it honors it. Aging has softened me, not weakened, softened. I no longer need to be right. I no longer measure my worth in productivity. I measure it in presence. There is a peace that comes when you stop trying to outrun regret and instead sit with it. Regret is a teacher, if you allow it to be. It points gently to what mattered all along. I walk through the house now, and it does not feel enormous anymore. It feels like a museum of shared time. Photographs line the hallway. In one, Elizabeth is standing in front of that maple tree, when it was barely taller than she was. We look impossibly young, certain of everything. If I could speak to that younger version of myself, I wouldn't scold him. I would simply say, pay attention. She is not asking for much, just you. We spend our early years trying to become somebody. We spend our later years trying to understand who we already were. What remains is not perfection. What remains is awareness. I am not afraid of death the way I once was. When you reach this age, it stops feeling like an intruder and begins to feel like a season. Not today, perhaps, but someday. And when that day comes, I do not want to be remembered as a man who provided well. I want to be remembered as a man who learned to listen, learned to look up, learned even if late, that love is made in ordinary afternoons. The porch grows quiet in the evenings. The air cools. The light fades slowly behind the trees. I sit a little longer than I used to. There is sorrow in getting older. Of course there is. You outlive people you never imagined saying goodbye to. You carry names in your address book that will never answer again. But there is also clarity. What remains when ambition quiets and pride loosens its grip is simple. The sound of someone you love moving through the kitchen, the weight of a hand resting in yours, the courage to say yes when it would be easier to say later. I cannot change the years behind me, but I can sit here now fully. And if there is one thing I understand at 80, it is this. In the end, we do not lose love all at once. We lose it slowly when we stop noticing, and we keep it, even in memory, when we finally learn to